Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Today, we're going to go through employer considerations for returning employees to work as the governor issues more orders and information about reopening. This becomes more and more important to employers to evaluate what should they be doing to make their workplace safe for their employees as they're bringing people back, expanding their workforce or expanding their operations, or for those of us who are essential and operating now but wanting to ensure that our workplaces remain safe. My name is Jamie Bossuat. I am an employment lawyer at Kroloff in Stockton. I do both employment law and business litigation, but my primary focus is on employment law. I do employee policies for my clients. I help with ongoing issues in the workplace. I give advice. I do investigations and trainings, such as the annual sexual harassment trainings. And then I assist if there are any claims and litigation or administrative complaints arising from the workers in the workplace. So what we're going to do today is go through quite a bit of information in an attempt to give you an overview of the issues that you should be considering when returning employees to the workplace or when operating a workplace in the current pandemic, and some resources to guide you in doing that. And I will try and provide links to various government websites, helpful information and pamphlets and information that you can use to learn more and implement that. And then, of course, do rely on your legal counsel when issues arise. One of the highest liability areas at this point in time is evaluating needs for leaves of absence, both under the federal expansion and existing law, and employee disabilities and requests to be out of the workplace. We're going to go through the current guidelines and orders that are in place, both from the state level and then at our local level in San Joaquin County, where most of you are operating. We're going to talk about workplace safety and modifications that need to be made to the workplace to bring employees back. And that includes the guidance that was issued yesterday, May 7th, from the state regarding the plan for reopening. And we're going to be talking about how to actually return employees to work, what information to communicate them, what trainings need to be done, and then addressing any illnesses or absences that occur once you have your employees back. I always like to start out with some sources of information. The California Coronavirus Response website, covid19.ca.gov, has a lot of information, and it has the current guidance for the current reopening. The California Department of Public Health has industry-specific guidance and statistics. The Cal-OSHA website is updated with COVID-related information and additional guidance for workplaces. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the federal agency, has information on evaluating individual employee symptoms as well as guidances for businesses. For example, they have cleaning recommendations in the event of an exposure. And then the California Office of Business and Economic Development, I always like to provide that because that provides a lot of financial resources for employers as they navigate the pandemic. So the current guidelines and orders, the federal government guidance is mostly from the CDC at this point from an employment perspective. There were guidance issued in terms of staying out of large groups and staying home if you were sick, but our state and local orders are more specific. So those are the ones that we really need to be following at this point in time in order to be compliant. So there we go. Okay, so the California stay-in-place order is still in effect, even though there's this reopening, which we will go through in a minute. The existing order is in effect. It requires all individuals living in California to stay at home or at their place of residence, and it exempts critical infrastructure workers. And there's two lists to identify who is a critical infrastructure worker. There's the federal list from the Department of Homeland Security, and I have the link for you there. And then there's a state list of critical infrastructure workers. Both of those have been updated as we've gone along throughout this pandemic, and I imagine they will continue to be updated. So do look at them every so often to make sure you have a current list. I also want to note that California has issued guidance for at-risk persons. So those over 75 years of age, those with a chronic medical condition, or those with a compromised immune system. And there are some enhanced measures recommended for them. And these guidances are still in place for these vulnerable populations, even though we have a phased reopening. People are to remain at home and continue with only outdoor activities. They're supposed to socially distance, put in place a plan for if they become ill, who may be able to assist them, and then have increased hygiene and cleaning and disinfecting. We are finding that those in those higher risk categories are more concerned about coming to work, are more worried about it. And so they're an important population to pay attention to as you reopen. So here's the roadmap that the governor put out at first. And this is taken from that slide. The link on the bottom is to the government's full PowerPoint presentation. So stage 1 is what we were in initially, with just essential businesses open. Stage 2 allows lower risk workplaces to open, and that's going to be a phased reopening of phase 2 businesses. Stage 3 is higher risk businesses, and stage 4 would end the stay-at-home order. So this stage 2, businesses can open with modifications. That goes into effect today, May 8th. That includes curbside retail, such as bookstores, jewelry stores, toy stores, clothing stores, florists. This is phased in with curbside pickup and delivery first, with stores actually becoming open later. And then any supply chain, manufacturing and distribution for those businesses. Prior to this, only essential business manufacturing and distribution was ongoing. And then the second part of phase 2 will be shopping malls and other destination retail, personal services like pet grooming or tanning, office-based businesses, although telework remains strongly encouraged, dine-in restaurants, schools and child cares. Now there are schools and child cares currently open already, but I think this is a more widespread intention there. And then outdoor museums and gallery spaces. The next phase would be higher risks such as hair salons or gyms, in-person entertainment venues, and then stage 4 would be the end of the order, with concerts and other live sports opening. San Joaquin County's order is in effect now. There was some guidance issued this morning that it's going to be updated to reflect the governor's expanded opening. It requires all individuals living in the county to stay at home, except for those that have to engage in essential business. So that will be revised to now allow those in the retail establishments in the governor's order to also leave their homes for that type of work. Everyone is supposed to be maintaining social distancing, both in essential businesses and non-essential businesses. And what that means specifically in the San Joaquin County order is staying 6 feet away from others, washing hands with soap and water for at least 20 seconds, and regularly using hand sanitizer, covering coughs and sneezes, regularly cleaning high-touch surfaces, and not shaking hands. So non-essential businesses, other than those that are going to be phased in with the governor's new expansion, are only allowed to operate to the extent minimally necessary. So there's minimum basic operations written into the current San Joaquin County order. And that is things that you need to do to maintain your inventory and facilities, to ensure safety and sanitation of your facilities, to process your payroll. You can deliver existing inventory to residences and businesses, and then you can do activities necessary to facilitate people working from home for your business. Essential businesses can operate at full capacity to the extent necessary to carry out their essential purposes, but they have to minimize the number of employees in the workplace and only assign employees to work in the office or in the business when that employee cannot work from home. They have to follow social distancing, of course. And in the most recent version of the order, which was issued in April, you have to complete a social distancing protocol and post that at the front door of the business or at each entrance to the business and then at any facility you have, and distribute it to the employees who are coming to the business or the facility. And you also have to post a sign advising visitors to the business to follow your current social distancing guidelines and not to come in if they are sick. This is just a screenshot of the appendix. It asks businesses to go through various checklists to ensure that they are doing what they can to reduce the spread of COVID-19 in their workplace. Here on the left is a sample of handout. I think it's available on the City of Stockton website is where I found it, but it's put out by the San Joaquin County Public Health Services. And this is a social distancing handout, that required form that can be posted at essential businesses that are remaining open. The left, or sorry, on the right is COVID-19 symptoms, because you're asking those who have symptoms not to come into your workplace. And I think this is actually the current list, but later in the presentation when we talk about individual employees coming back to work, we'll go through the current CDC list. So the next phase of this presentation is talking about workplace safety, what we can do to make our workplaces safe and what the government expects us to do. So we're going to go through face coverings because I know that's a topic of interest, the new state guidance for reopening, and then existing state guidance that has already been out there, how you go about evaluating your workplace, and then briefly we'll talk about illness and injury prevention plans. So face coverings, we have again the 3 levels, federal, state, and county. At the federal level, CDC recommends face coverings in public settings where other social distancing measures are difficult to maintain. For example, a grocery store. The California Department of Public Health has a very similar recommendation. You may choose to wear a face covering when you must be in public for essential activities such as shopping. But wearing a face covering does not eliminate the need to physically distance. There's a concern by the public health officials that people will feel overly comfortable when they are wearing a face mask and get closer to people than they otherwise would. That's something that we do need to be cautious of in our workplaces as well, because socially distancing is the safest measure to take. San Joaquin County follows currently the same guidance as the state. There are some counties and cities which are listed here, which require masks when you are outside of your home. They're listed there. Some cities also require masks inside essential businesses, and that's Fremont, Pasadena, Long Beach, Inglewood, and Burbank. What's important to note here is that if you have employees that are traveling outside of our county, it's important to look up the local guidance wherever they are traveling or working from, because it's changing very frequently, and you want to make sure that when they go somewhere else, they're also complying with that guidance. So the state guidance for reopening is really very specific and very helpful to employers in terms of evaluating what they should be doing in the workplace. And there's 5 steps that businesses should undertake before they reopen. And this applies to new businesses as the governor phases them in, but it also applies to those of us who are operating essential businesses, because if there was to be an exposure, they are going to look at what you've done to protect your employees. And it doesn't make sense that there would be different standards in different businesses in similar environments, even though you're providing an agricultural product, which is essential. If you're providing a consumer product, the nature of the work environment is the same. So it's a good idea to evaluate whether our essential businesses that are currently operating are following these new recommendations as well. So first, all businesses should perform a detailed risk assessment and implement a site-specific plan. There are checklists issued for various industries, which we'll go through, and those need to be posted. Second, you need to train your employees. The employees need to be trained on the new procedures and policies that you've put in place, and so that they follow them. Third, you need to implement individual control measures and screenings. And sorry, my husband walked in. It's difficult to work from home. You need to implement individual control measures and screening so that you make sure that the policies that you've determined are good for your workplace are actually being followed and are still working. 4, you need to implement, I spelled that wrong, I'm sorry. You need to implement disinfecting protocols and evaluate whether those are still appropriate when you bring people back. And then you need to implement physical distancing guidelines. So there's some industry guidance that has been issued for the businesses that are opening. So retailers, manufacturing, and warehouses. And these guidelines that have been issued for these 3 industries are illustrative of what other businesses should be considering. So retailers, for example, should increase pickup and delivery business so that they are limiting contact with customers. That could be by delivering items into a trunk directly. I know a lot of our local restaurants are doing this, for example, to protect their customers and employees already. Or leave items at the door rather than having a face-to-face interaction for a home delivery. Installing hands-free devices for payment systems, for soap and paper towel dispensers, or for time cards. Manufacturing, they specifically mention closing break rooms, using barriers, increasing distance between tables, or creating more outdoor areas for taking breaks, for example, so you have less employees congregating in a small condensed area. Warehouses, they discuss minimizing transaction time between the warehouse employees and transportation personnel. So we're talking about different groups of employees who cross paths during the day. And then stepped up cleaning of delivery vehicles and equipment before each delivery. So each contact with a different consumer or location or delivery points, and then using personal protective equipment for each stop and rotating that so that you have fresh personal protective equipment for each new location that you arrive at. So there's a lot of state guidance that came out yesterday. I haven't actually had time to review all of it, but here they are listed in alphabetical order from agriculture and livestock all the way through retail. In this presentation, we're going to go through office environments because I think those are widely applicable to those of you who are watching the webinar. And it helps us to walk through the thought process because even though they've issued these guidances, each workplace needs to be evaluated individually in terms of the nature of your workforce, the nature of what you're doing in the workplace, and the structural issues that you have in the workplace in terms of the size of the facility, the number of dividers in the facility, and things like that. So I mentioned a moment ago, but here it is for workspaces, that checklist. It's actually 3 pages. And then there's a general guidance that goes along with it, which is longer, 7 pages, and walks you through a lot of the criteria. And so these are specific and required at this point in time for the businesses that are reopening in the industries that they apply to. But this kind of recommendation has been out there for quite a while. It's part of the illness and injury prevention plans that you do. There was a general guidance issued for general industry on the CDC website that was then linked and referred to by the Cal-OSHA website. So those are guidances that should have been followed. And they walked through this similar process. So the process is that you start by identifying the sources of COVID-19 in your workplace. General public, customers, co-workers, your actual workforce. Look at the risk you have in your workforce. Do you have vulnerable populations there? Age, medical conditions, other issues like that. Like childcare obligations, this is something you want to consider because those people might not be returning to the workplace immediately. And then you want to look at the risk factors that your workers have in terms of community transmission when they're not at your workplace. So these are the sources of COVID-19 and the potential individuals who it can be spread to. And you want to look at then what controls can you put in place to stop the spread. And the new guidance documents walk through a lot of these details in terms of suggestions, but this overall thought process will help you to evaluate your individualized workplace. Air filters, for example, physical barriers like employee cubes, what offices you're actually using, hallways, for example, reductions to the overall number of people in your building. And then personal protective equipment like masks or gloves or those sneeze screens that we see at grocery stores now might be appropriate for your receptionist, for example. You want to look at your routine cleaning, which isn't necessarily a control or a change to the workplace, but cleaning high-touch surfaces like lights, like door handles, cleaning that might not have been happening on a daily or hourly or more frequent basis in your workplace before, but that is now a good idea. And then you want to address how you're going to deal with an exposure in your workplace. If someone is ill or is exhibiting symptoms or has tested positive, how do you control and trace the spread of that so that you don't have more employees become ill and leave the workplace? I mentioned this, but here it is on a slide. I'd forgotten I had it included. The OSHA issued a guidance document in March of this year for COVID, and it walks through this process of evaluating your exposure, evaluating the level of risk in your workplace, and then implementing precautions. So this is a document that I recommend that is very helpful, and it provides more guidance because it's 32 pages long versus the 7 for each industry issued by the state yesterday. And then just a brief note, you all have injury and illness prevention plans. They are required in California. You have to have the written plan, but then OSHA wants to know, are you implementing your written plan? Are you training when it's necessary? Are you making sure that that written plan is updated and still effective? Are you identifying new risks and incorporating them? So training is required for Cal-OSHA compliance when you identify a new or previously unrecognized hazard, and COVID counts. So that should be a consideration in terms of your illness and injury prevention plan, as well as complying with these very specific guidances that are being issued for the current pandemic. And then training is also required when it's necessary for supervisors to familiarize themselves with hazards. So that's on an ongoing basis or in response to a new hazard. So the new guidance requires employers that 5-step process that we went through a few slides ago. You have to put in place a plan. And under the guidance for offices, that's what I'm talking about specifically here because I had to pick one. But you need to identify a person responsible for the implementation of the plan, one or more persons. You need to conduct a risk assessment and identify measures that will be taken to prevent the spread of the virus. You need to train and communicate the plan to your employees. You need to have a process in place to make sure that it's being complied with. Employees, I mentioned this earlier, but they have their old habits and they are going to be back in the workplace seeing their friends, and they are going to be going through their day in ways that they always went through it before. And so you need to make sure that the procedures and processes you've put in place are actually being followed, and see whether there need to be any modifications to allow it to work better. If you decided to put hand sanitizer in one location and the employees are needing it somewhere else, it needs to be moved and then refilled if it runs out, that kind of thing on an ongoing basis. And then you need to investigate cases that arise, report them as necessary, and then identify those that have been exposed who are in close contact with that employee and isolate those employees as well. So you have to train your employees when they return to work, or when you implement these new processes, if your employees are already at work and you're adjusting to this new guidance. That includes general information on the disease. Employees and the public in general has a lot of misconceptions about COVID, what can spread it, what it is, what the symptoms are, how much risk there is in the transmission of the disease. So as much as you can, I recommend giving out information that the CDC publishes, that the California Department of Public Health publishes, that our local county is putting out, so that you can correct any misinformation that the employee may have received from Facebook or social media or their relatives, so that they're on the same page as you are with regard to the seriousness of the disease and what it actually looks like. They need to be trained on how to self-screen so that they can report to you if they are experiencing COVID symptoms. They need to be cautioned about staying home if they are sick or if they've had an exposure. And they need to receive information on benefits available to them to stay home and still receive pay. If you have sick leave that's available to the employees, and the state offers disability benefits, they shouldn't be trying to come to work and mask or hide their symptoms because they're afraid they won't be receiving their paycheck. So it's important to share that information. The guidance recommends that you advise the employees on when to seek medical attention, on the importance of hand hygiene, and also coughs, social distancing, etc., and the use of personal protective equipment if your employees are using it. For example, personal protective equipment should never be shared. They need to know when to discard it, when to wear it, how to take on and off the mask without contaminating themselves, etc. So this is the list of COVID symptoms that's on the CDC website as of this morning, May 8th. So these are the symptoms you should train your employees on. The CDC website, I have the link there on the bottom, also includes guidance on when to go see a physician. So that could be relayed to your employees as well, and the guidance requires that. So cough, shortness of breath or difficulty breathing, fever, chills, muscle pain, sore throat, or a new loss of taste or smell. There are also less common symptoms, including gastrointestinal symptoms. I mentioned handouts. Here's a slide with some of them about social distancing from SHRM, about the spread of germs, about facts about COVID. These could be handed out during your trainings. They could be posted on the wall, and they will remind employees to wash their hands and to stay apart from one another. All of that is very helpful. Those CDC ones are free and available on the CDC website, and there's others, like I mentioned earlier, from our local authorities. So when you're bringing your employees back to work and when you're following this guidance, you need to evaluate individual control measures that can be implemented. The guidance includes temperature checks and/or symptom screenings. Temperature checks, pretty self-explanatory. Symptom screenings are inquiring with your employees regularly on whether they feel ill that particular day. Sick workers need to be advised to stay home. That's the guidance in these current industry guidance that was just recently issued. It's also the guidance that has been ongoing from the CDC and the California Department of Public Health. Face coverings are recommended in the new guidance in office workspaces for those who are in the vicinity of others. So basically those that can't stay 6 feet away from others. This would include someone who could maybe work in their own office without being close to people, but then put on a mask when they are out in the hallway, in the break room, or in another office interacting with someone for some reason. And then there is a recommendation to provide gloves in addition to hand sanitizer, soap, and water. So you need to evaluate cleaning and disinfecting and put in place protocols for this. So thoroughly cleaning your high traffic areas, doorknobs, toilets, hand washing facilities. Evaluate your routine janitorial. Require employees to clean and disinfect their personal workspaces. So the telephone at their desk, their computer mouse, their desk itself, whatever that is, and provide the equipment for them to do that, like disinfecting wipes. Avoid sharing phones, work supplies, and office equipment. To the extent possible, have the employee have their own collection of those items and use them without sharing. So in our office, for example, we have a little stash of convenient office supplies next to our photocopy machine, like pens and stickies. We're considering taking that away and asking the employees instead to use their own from their desk. Pens are particularly bad because people put them in their mouths, they carry them around in their pocket, and they could transmit illness. I know it seems over the top, and I myself consider that. Is this really necessary? But from an employment lawyer perspective, you want to look at what's my potential exposure. From a human perspective, in terms of not wanting anyone to become ill. And then if someone did become ill, what's going to be looked at is what did you do to protect your workplace? And did you take all reasonable steps to protect your workplace? Did you follow guidance issued by government entities? Did you really evaluate what could be done in your workplace? Because if you end up with a scenario in which someone becomes ill, you want to have to be able to show that you did what you could to create a safe workplace, which is really our obligation under California law, is to create a reasonably safe workplace for our employees to the extent we can. And this guidance is telling us what the government thinks is a safe workplace. And it is a lot of new procedures. With copiers, fax machines, telephones, staplers, consider, or actually the guidance says do, provide wipes to disinfect them in between uses. So if you have one person working that copy machine on a particular shift, have that person clean it at the end. Or if it's a shared copy machine like we have in our office, provide wipes so that when people are done or before they get there, they can wipe off the touched surfaces in between different individuals using it. There's a recommendation to consider upgrading your air filters or increase the quality of outside air into your building. And then I've provided the link to the government approved cleaners, which are approved for COVID-19. So your social distancing protocols, it's the same process you went through for the last slides, but you're going to identify potential hazards and then figure out controls to prevent them from spreading to your employees. Telework is still recommended to the extent possible because it reduces your head count in the office, it reduces exposure to other people. You can adjust shifts and schedules. You can adjust breaks so not everyone is trying to use the break room or the stairwell at the same time. You can arrange workspaces, evaluate, I'm going to move on to the next portion of this, physical adjustments, such as when you have one facility that has less people in it and another that has a lot, do you want to reassign someone to a different location? Can you move people to different workstations in the environment to get them further apart? Can you make a hallway one way or stairwell an exit versus an entrance so that you don't have people crossing in close proximity to one another? Can you purchase more cube dividers if people are sharing cubes? Do you need to modify your break room? So do you need to take some chairs out so people aren't tempted to sit close together? Other things like if you have people come into a waiting room and then go to their meetings, maybe they can be directed directly into the meeting room rather than having a significant number of people congregating in your lobby. And then signage, floor markings, wall signage, reminders to help employees not fall back into their old habits, not lean against the cube to chat with their coworker, but to stand on a marked line on the floor, which is further away. So all of these things are going to help ensure safety for your workplace, and then write them down, document them in policies, include them in your plans so that you can prove that you did them and meant to enforce them. And then continually engage in this process with your employees so that they are aware that this is a requirement. You never want to have to discipline employees, but these are things that could be the source of discipline if employees are just refusing to comply. And I just want to note that the old guidance hasn't been withdrawn that was out there earlier in the pandemic. Cal-OSHA has guidances for the industries listed on this slide. Those are still good and should be referred to. The California Department of Public Health also had quite a few guidances, some of which are for businesses that we don't have new guidance on, like veterinary practices. There is a standard for aerosol transmissible diseases, ATD, which applies in hospitals, nursing facilities, and other residential type facilities. I've got them listed on the slide for you here. So if you are practicing in this type of industry, do make sure that you have a standard in place in your workplace that is compliant with the most recent government standard out there. There are some interim guidances also specific to these, which are listed on the bottom for preventing exposure and efficiently using respiratory supplies or respirator supplies. And then just one closing note on this. The governor this week issued an executive order which expands workers' compensation or changes the standard for workers' compensation for COVID-related illnesses. If an employee does come down with COVID in your workplace, they are presumed to have contracted it in the workplace. And that presumption is different than existing law, which required the employee to present evidence of a reasonable factual basis for concluding that their illness was obtained in the workplace. And so workers that are covered under this new order are those who reported to work outside of the home and received a positive test or physician diagnosis within 14 days of last working outside the home. So your employees who are teleworking would not necessarily fall within this, but if they're coming in and out of the workplace, that may not be true. And so this is just another reason to make sure your workplace is safe, to prevent against liability for workers' comp claims and injuries, which could raise your premiums. And if you do have one of these cases, there's some timeline changes. So do work quickly with your workers' comp carrier. So how do you return your employees to work? Let's talk about some individualized issues. What about workers who are on furlough or temporary layoffs? Or on unpaid leave, or whatever you have them out on. It's important to communicate with them on what their return to work dates are. Reach out to those employees and see if they're going to come back. And alleviate any concerns they have about safety by sharing with them the new safety mechanisms that you're putting in place in your workplace. Evaluate whether those employees are now entitled to a leave of absence. So employees who were furloughed were not eligible for FFRCA expanded leave, the federal leave expansions. But now that there's work for them and you're bringing them back as active employees, some of those leaves apply. And other state leaves apply too, such as the Fair Employment and Housing Act disability accommodation rights. Your employees may have an illness or disability that entitles them to additional accommodations or to additional leave that needs to be evaluated as you're bringing people back. And I just want to note that a lot of employees with immune conditions or other health conditions, you may not be aware of them because those employees are able to work in their normal job without any need for accommodation. But because they are now at a higher risk due to the COVID spread within our communities, they may now need an accommodation, and you may learn about new employee health conditions when employees do ask for additional time off or express a concern about returning to work. You want to make sure that you provide notice to employees of any changes relating to pay or benefits, and that you keep in touch with your benefits providers for that purpose. If employees are coming back from unemployment, potentially you need to inform unemployment that they've been offered work, for example. You want to evaluate how you're going to train those employees on all of your new procedures, because now you don't want to bring everyone into one training room like you may have done in the past. So phase that in with people socially distanced, do it via Zoom, do it individually, but you need to evaluate how you're going to do that. And then you want to update your workplace posters. There's a lot of new posters. There's the Department of Labor poster on the federal leave expansion. There are the posters required by our county at the entrances. There is the posting for the new guidances that were issued by the government yesterday for the state phased in reopening. There may be more. You just want to make sure that you're evaluating your posters. So when employees express fear about returning to work, which I have heard quite a bit of, from my clients at this point in time, you want to be sure to listen to them. That conversation could lead to learning that that person has a disability that you have to accommodate, or that they have an entitlement to a leave of absence under the expanded law or existing law or your existing policies. That is a huge area of liability, is denying or failing to offer a leave or an accommodation, failing to engage in the interactive process. So if that arises, that is an area in which you would want to seek additional legal guidance and advice before denying a leave or before terminating someone for failing to return to work. Those are all things that need to be thought through very carefully. You can discipline an employee for violating your attendance policies, but in this current crisis, that should be done with a lot of caution. And also, employees have a right to refuse to work in unsafe working conditions if there's a reasonable and good faith belief that the condition is unsafe. That could be the case in your workplace if something changes quickly, but that's again something that really needs to be evaluated carefully. I just want to mention hazard pay. It's not required, but employees are aware that it's being paid. It's been in the news a lot. They may know people that are receiving hazard pay. And so if you have a widespread fear of returning to the workplace, this is something that you could consider. So the EEOC has issued guidance, so has the Department of Fair Employment and Housing here on a state level, that allows you to make inquiries about COVID symptoms from your employees. And the guidance that we just went through requires that on a regular basis. You can also make inquiries about travel. You could take body temperatures. Again, the guidance referenced that as well. You can require medical notes from your employees to return to the workplace. Now, I don't recommend that you require a medical note for that employee to go out on the leave, because you want to get someone who's potentially ill out of your workplace as quickly as possible to reduce transmission. But for return to work, that is an option and a recommendation for you. Don't forget your wage and hour obligations. If you send an employee home because they have a temperature, or because they begin exhibiting, or they have symptoms that you catch in a screening, they may be entitled to reporting time pay, which is 2 hours or half of their scheduled shift. When hiring new employees, you have a little bit of flexibility as well. You can screen your applicants for COVID symptoms, and you can delay a start date or withdraw an offer due to COVID symptoms. Just a note of caution, you can't withdraw an offer if you discover that the employee is pregnant or of a certain age and more at risk, because that would be an impermissible reason to deny a job. But current COVID symptoms are permissible at this point in time. If you're hiring short-term employees, be very clear about the duration of that employment, what benefits they are entitled to if it's not the same as your permanent employees, and what job duties they'll be doing. And if that changes, be sure to update that employee in writing. And then if you're hiring someone who's going to be working from home, or even someone who's going to be coming in, consider whether you want to do remote interviews or onboarding in order to protect the person that's going to be doing those interviews and to protect that worker. If they're never coming into your workplace, if you could remote onboard them, then that reduces workers' compensation risk for a transmission. Do be aware of disability-related inquiries. Employees have privacy rights about their medical conditions and disabilities. I recommend this EEOC publication called Pandemic Preparedness in the Workplace and the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's written in a very user-friendly, frequently asked questions style. And here's an example of a way to ask employees if they're going to be coming back or able to come back to work without asking, do you have a disability that would prevent you from coming back? So the employee can indicate yes, they would have trouble coming back, but they don't on this initial questionnaire have to indicate why. You would want to follow up with the employees, of course, to determine whether there is an accommodation needed or a leave of absence that would apply. But you want to be cautious with disability and illness related inquiries that the employee doesn't have an obligation to disclose to you. Also, another note, the California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect this year, and collecting body temperature, symptoms, travel, exposures, that's all personal information under that law. So if your business is covered by the CCPA, you want to issue a CCPA notice advising the employee that you're collecting that information and the purposes for which it would be used. You want to consider revising your employment policies. And it's up to you whether this is a permanent revision to your handbook or a temporary issuance of policies that are in place during the pandemic. But it's a good time to do that and to get those distributed to the employees as they are coming back. So some examples are, how much public access are you going to allow to your workplace? Should your telework policy be changed? Do your attendance policies and leave of absence policies need to be amended or modified or updated? Do you need to update your timekeeping and remote meal and rest break policies? Are you taking as much track of that as you would like to be? How has it gone a couple months into this pandemic with employees now working from home? Are you providing enough devices and technology? Do you need to provide greater reimbursements? In California, all use of technology that benefits the employer on a personal device is reimbursable. So cell phone use, computer use, laptop use, home internet, all of that would be potentially something that needs to be reimbursed. So if you're issuing a stipend for whatever portion of the employee's device you believe you're utilizing, is it enough, or does it need to be increased or decreased based on what you saw that the employee actually used? Perhaps you were issuing stipends, but now you've issued laptops, so that stipend is too large. You definitely need to update policies for reporting illness and safety. All of those are required by the new guidance, and you want them in writing and distributed to the employees. And then benefits may have changed. Employees may have come off of benefits, medical benefits, because they were out of the workplace, or there were some changes under federal law to health savings accounts. All of that needs to be provided to the employees. Okay, this is our last section. This is illnesses and leaves of absence for employees who are back at work with you. What do you do if an employee tests positive? When can an employee use paid sick leave? What reasons do employees have for using California Families First Coronavirus Response Act? That's the FFRCA, the new federal law. There is a food sector worker sick leave. If you have 500 or more employees, that's a California specific law. Of course, the FMLA and CFRA still apply. So do all of California's other laws. And then we want to be conscious of disability accommodation leaves under the Fair Employment and Housing Act and the Americans with Disabilities Act. So a confirmed or suspected case of COVID in your workplace is a worst case scenario, but you want to be prepared for this. So that employee should be sent home immediately. But he should be asked to identify workers he worked closely with within the previous 24 hours so that those employees can be sent home as well, and advised to take caution and consult with their physician. Be careful that you don't disclose that employee's identity because they have health privacy rights. So you can advise colleagues that you are aware that they have been exposed, but you don't tell them that it was Bob down the hall that was the exposure. If your employees have been exposed, the CDC has health recommendations for an exposure. You should give them that guidance and recommend they follow it. The link is there for you on the slide. You should follow CDC recommendations for cleaning after an exposure, and I've got that link for you as well. There are some relaxed exposure requirements for essential workers. They can continue coming to work as long as they're symptom-free and some protocols are followed. These protocols do change very quickly. I've got the current ones listed on the slide, but I recommend, if this applies to you, that you check out the current CDC guidance on workplace exposures for essential workers. Some other situations that may arise. Your employee had contact with someone who tested positive. You take the same precautions that were on the last slide. That's the most conservative approach at this time. And you want to advise the employees, though, that you didn't have someone in the workplace who tested positive, but there's a potential exposure and you're being cautious. You need to advise your customers or consumers if there has been an exposure. If they came in and had an in-person meeting with someone who then tested positive, that person should be advised so that we can contain the spread again. And when can an employee come back? Of course, when they're released by a physician or medical professional. If that's not possible for whatever reason, the CDC does have some recommendations in terms of timing. And of course, those are also constantly changing. So do check the CDC website for that or ask the local health department. Employees who have an illness may be inclined to hide it or to come to work anyway because they're committed to their job or because they are afraid to lose pay. So we want to provide them with information on your own company benefits for employees who have to be out for their own illness or a family member's illness. And this is a slide from or an excerpt from the chart that's available on the Department of Industrial Relations and the Labor Commissioner website. It's a great resource, and I recommend that you share this with your employees and take a look at it yourself. The Department of Labor Standards Enforcement in California has issued some guidance on when sick leave can be used. For non-essential workers, they can use paid sick leave if they are out of work because of the stay-at-home order. They can use paid sick leave if they're an essential worker, if they have some of the criteria that are more specific, like a potential exposure, being 65 years or older, having a medical condition, or caring for someone who has a medical condition or is out of school or daycare. You can't require that the employees use their sick leave if they leave for one of these reasons. However, it's their choice. And you can require that they use it in a 2-hour increment. You can't require a 4-hour increment or a half-day increment, but you could require that they take a minimum of 2 hours of sick leave. And then we get so focused on what's in front of us, which is the COVID-19 outbreak, that we forget about other types of leave. We talked a little bit about ADA accommodations, but we also have pregnancy leave, new parent leave, school and child care emergency leave, bone marrow leave. There are a lot. They're not all listed on this slide, but remember those and don't forget to screen for them and to implement them where it's appropriate. You may also have your own employer policies like bereavement leave that you need to follow consistently. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act is the federal leave expansion. And this is the breakdown that's provided on the Department of Labor website. That's the agency implementing that act. And I have the link to their frequently asked questions on the bottom of this slide. Those are very thorough. There are a lot of them and they are continually being updated. So if you have a question about how this is implemented, look there first, because that frequently asked questions is likely to have an answer to your question. So it's 2 weeks at the employee's full rate of pay if they're quarantined or experiencing symptoms themselves. 2 weeks at 2/3 pay if they are not able to work because they're caring for someone subject to quarantine or they're caring for someone whose school, work, or daycare is closed. It's 10 additional weeks at 2/3 pay where the employee is having to care for someone whose school or child care provider is closed. And that one applies only if they've been employed with you for at least 30 days. There are caps on the wages for these. It's $511 for a worker's own care and $200 for caring for someone else. There is a reimbursement to you which comes out of any payroll tax that you owe to the federal government. You can offset that in order to reimburse yourself for any wages you paid due to this new paid leave of absence. This does not make pay available for other uses of family medical leave, though. Those would still be unpaid. If you paid out more wages than you owed in tax, you can get a refund. You can't require employees to use other paid leave first. You can't require employees to find a replacement. There are some reinstatement rights under this act. And then you can't retaliate, of course. There are some exemptions for small businesses, which are those businesses with less than 50 employees. If it would create a financial hardship, which is a very high burden, it means that your business would cease operating at minimal capacity. If that employee that's asking for the leave is highly skilled or knowledgeable and essential to the business's ability to operate. And then if you can't find a replacement because there aren't workers able, willing, or qualified to replace that employee, even if that particular job is not a very highly skilled job. And so denying a leave, again, is a very high risk, area. So this is another one where before you deny a leave under this act, you're really going to want to consult with counsel, I think, would be a good idea. And then this is the last slide. I don't have time to go through the Payroll Protection Act alone. And it's a lot of this is questions for CPAs who are really digging into the details and can advise you on your particular financial issues. But I wanted to touch on just the types of employee pay that are reimbursable under this, which is salary, wages, commissions, or cash tips. Then other payments like vacation, parental leave, family leave, medical leave or sick leave, group health care benefits, retirement benefits, and state or local tax. Also, just a note with regard to employee headcounts, there are headcount requirements for the amounts paid being reimbursable. It doesn't have to be the same employee. If your employee leaves, quits, goes out on leave, and you replace them with someone else, that meets those requirements. There's no requirement that it be the same employee for headcount purposes. Okay, well, that is the end of this presentation. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And if you have any questions, you can go ahead and submit them to me through the question box. My contact information is there for you if you would like to reach out to me and request a copy of the slides. I will make it available. So thank you so much for attending. I know it was a lot of information. I really hope it gave you a good sense of what issues you should be considering in terms of reopening and expanding your business and bringing your employees back. I hope it also gave you some resources where you can look to find more information to kind of guide you through that process. And of course, I'm always available to answer questions or assist those of you who are my clients and those of you who have other counsel. This is a good opportunity to rely on your employment counsel to reduce your risk. But thank you for attending. Good luck to all of you. I hope you all stay safe and that your employees stay safe and that you're able to successfully negotiate the pandemic as it continues to change and we get more and new guidance from the government. So thank you and good luck.